Hello, and welcome to Playing With Inference, a podcast about the intersection of generative AI and games. Today, we're talking about a case we've talked about before, which is the role of generative AI in enabling digital improvisation experiences. Improv experiences, be they comedy, theater, actual play, and others, are classically hard to replicate in digital experiences, but large language models and generative AI, they might give us a fighting chance to have the tools we need to do this. Are they any good? Are they something players want? Well, we're going to come back to the discussion again today.
Joining us today is Stephen Piron, co-founder of Pickford AI, which is working directly on this problem, but more from an entertainment side. Their initial experience premiered at BAFTA and was screened most recently at Cannes. Stephen is perhaps most famously or infamously known as one of the folks that created the first deepfake of Joe Rogan, validated by the FBI while at DESA. Stephen, thank you for joining us. How's life being on the FBI list?
I think I actually got in trouble with the Canadian Intelligence Agency. So
who gets in problems with Canada?
I know. I didn't even know they had it. I didn't even know they had an intelligence agency. So we released that Rogan stuff. It went kind of crazy viral. I talked to some people at the CIA, and then I was a Canadian citizen living in the US. I still am a Canadian citizen living in the US. And then I got this call from this young marketing intern that worked in the office. It was like, oh, they're the intelligence agencies in our office and they want to speak to you. And they sort of read me the riot act because it's illegal to talk to a foreign intelligence agency before you talk to like the local intelligence agency. But it was all nothing. So
wait, so you were in Canada when this happened, or we were in the US?
I was living in New York, but in our Toronto office, we got a call, and they came into the Toronto office, and they sort of were like, this is against the whatever State Secret Act, and you could do 25 years in prison. But like ultimately, nothing happened. They gave us a bunch of pamphlets to hand out about cybersecurity, and we posted it in the lunchroom.
Okay, so to be clear for the other, because our team does have some Canadians on the team, for your advice when the intelligence services come for the kind of games that we're doing, speak to your home country first is what I'm hearing.
I think that's what you're supposed to do. I think that's what you're supposed to do. I think that's yeah.
Why would they? Was this just them trying to check what were you guys up to, or what draw their attention?
So the CIA was interested because we did this hokey audio deepfake of Joe Rogan. So it was 3 minutes. It's still on the internet. It's him saying crazy stuff. I think in 2019 it sounded really good. Right now, I don't actually know how good it sounds. You can kind of tell, but for whatever reason, it sort of hit a nerve and scared a bunch of people. And I think the fear was, if you can fake Joe Rogan's voice, then you can fake Vladimir Putin's voice. All of those things that were, that are still very relevant were relevant then. So I think the fear was, this is a tool of insurrection or something.
So we're now, 5-6 years in the future? Are we any more prepared for deep fakes? I mean, did you see Google VO? At the time of recording, Google's I/O was last week or whatever, and there's a ton of the Google VO3 models that went around the internet. While we're on the topic, what's your take on this? Are we prepared for it? Not prepared for it? Is it something to worry about? Not worry about?
I actually don't have an alarmist view of this sort of stuff. I think, you can you can make fake documents with Photoshop. You've been able to fake documents with Photoshop, and we still, I don't know what I'm saying. I'm not too worried about this sort of thing because the sort of familiarity with the technology makes it a little less scary. You have the option, someone could have generated that, right? You have that we all know about this option now.
I feel like that's true for, let's call it high stakes or very prominent deep fakes. As in Vladimir Putin say something that could start World War III, probably would go through a lot of checks and skepticism and whatnot. But I think where I worry the most on this topic is having my aging parents be scammed
Yeah.
by getting a call or even a video call of me asking them, hey, I need 10K, right? Like,
Yeah.
I feel like that's a much more likely event. And that's something where probably the next generation will be natively immune to this type of scams. But the older one is just going to have a hard time to adapt.
Sure. But then the older generation would also be susceptible to the Photoshop example, right? Or maybe it's just a function of not the particular technology, but just sort of people from a certain demographic that aren't familiar with the latest tech.
So I think we'll probably come back to this topic a little bit, particularly when we're talking about the role of this technology in entertainment and digital doubles and things like that. But let's make sure that I have a lot of context on what you're doing, right, Ramon? But those listening may not be familiar with what you've been doing now with Pickford. You want to kind of, once you got done scaring national security services, what was next? Like, what are you working on now?
So, in the wake of the Joe Rogan thing, there was a bunch of interest from Silicon Valley companies, and we sold the company to Jack Dorsey in early 2020. And I worked at Square, which is now called Block, for 4 years before doing this. But the idea of it, like, was always in my brain. The idea of there's these cool tools and we could use them for entertainment. Mm-hmm. And then realizing kind of, I mean, it's silly to say this, but like Hollywood has always been a tech business. So the motion picture camera was like this crazy high tech invention in 1910 or whatever. It was also like a super controversial technology and super experimental, and people didn't know what to do with it. So, and the things that they did with it in the beginning were not the things that we do with it now, right? So basically they put on a play, you put the camera 10 feet in front of the play and like let it roll. And they didn't have the idea of like cutting or like panning the camera or moving the camera at all or any sort of special effects. And they all of the sort of the grammar of film was invented, subsequently. And the entire industry, right? Like the idea of a film premiere or a film critic or like the Oscars, all inventions that came out of this one piece of technology. So how does generative AI change entertainment? That is a question. And it probably changes it in ways that are like different than just replacing what already exists. Mm-hmm. So lots of things out there to sort of replicate what's already being done to sort of compress costs and compress time. And that's cool. But I actually think the more exciting bit is like, what can we do that's different? Yep. And I think if you can generate assets and generate content in like real time or close to real time, and it's relatively cheap, then you can have like, it enables a kind of interactivity with the audience. And that's the cool bit. And that's way more like improv or live music or something, like a play in front of people.
Yes. And sorry, I'm just trying to lay the groundwork here because there's so much I want to dive into because we've had some of these conversations before. So I want to help get everyone up to speed. You've been experimenting and showing some of this.
Yeah.
Ramon kind of hinted that like, hey, you showed some demos. Also at the time of, or not demos, but kind of early screenings. At the time of recording here, there's a AI event here in Los Angeles. We might talk about, you're going to do, I'm hoping maybe get a screening then if I can get in. Let's talk about that a little bit, because then I think we'll have a lot of the context for us to really dive into the meat here.
Okay. So the first screening we did was at BAFTA in January. And it was sort of a sitcom where it was a Christmas dinner. And there were 8 sort of stock characters sitting down around a turkey at a table. And each character there was a wacky uncle and the frustrated mother and the idealistic young daughter. Sorry, pretty cliche stuff.
Yeah.
And and the weird British neighbor that they invite over out of sympathy. We did it in London, so we had to have a British character. And they are, you see them acting out this thing, and then there's a very simple chat interface, and everyone takes out their phones, and as the kind of action is happening, they type in what they want to see happen. So they can type in what they want to see happen, and then they can upvote what other people. And that simple mechanics can sort of move the story forward in hopefully interesting ways, or just kind of crazy funny ways, or silly ways. But there is something like where you have an idea, or you see someone else's idea, you jump on it, and then 30 seconds later, 60 seconds later, you see it on the screen. There's something cool about that. That's maybe it's a novelty, maybe it won't last forever, but there's definitely something cool about to see it happen. Maybe just what we are doing sort of in LA, in Culver City, a couple of days from now, which is the exact same thing we showed at Cannes, is a much more simplified version, which is just two people going on a date. So we wanted to simplify it and make it just a dialogue between two people. So it's a blind date. They never met each other. And there is a weird, loose objective in maybe you want them to break up. Maybe you want them to see each other again. Maybe you want it to go horribly wrong. Maybe you want to, I don't know, fall in love or whatever. And you can do that. You can do that by, again, this exact same mechanism.
So I actually went to a screening maybe 2 months ago for the date one. In my case, we were watching or participating in Voldemort dating Palpatine, I think was the situation, which is very interesting. Palpatine did remark on how Voldemort's efforts were to take over a high school. Well, I guess it was like taking over galaxies. I remember, I think I emailed you, Stephen, and I remarked to my wife that it was just genuinely funny, right? Like it's rare, LMs can write, but they don't write in a way normally that is engaging enough to get me to laugh. And there's something really interesting in having the LM sort of perform, but based on the steerings from the audience. And then there's also some really engaging aspects of seeing other people's recommendations and then laughing about you already in yourself and how this is going to pan out. So, I'm going to do something like that. And you're really bouncing off each other's. It was really different. I was really impressed that, I don't know what type of LLM black magic you're doing behind the scenes, but it definitely removed from the generic bland text or the median text. I think we've discussed in this podcast before. LLMs tend to go for the median. It really steered away from that, and I think it has to do with the audience being the one steering.
Well, thank you for saying that. We tried hard to make it silly, and I'm not sure how we did that. Well, it's not there's a lot of sort of prompt massaging and experimenting with different LLMs and using whatever works in the hackiest way possible. So we're probably not obeying the rules of good software engineering or good LLM engineering. It's nice to hear you say that it was funny, because we want to make something entertaining, right? So, it might be, as long as people laugh and having a good time, that's all that matters.
Yeah. I did notice, I wrote again this on the feedback, but I did notice that there was a big difference between the experience of Voldemort dating Palpatine versus two characters that I didn't even know about, and also had a lot less context for the other, because they were minor characters. Probably their Wikipedia page is smaller, hence the context that the LM has is also smaller. I wonder, how do you see that? How do you see that challenge as in a way we're piggybacking on how much context these models have? And that's true also for the audience, right? So how do you address that? And that's a pretty vague question.
Well, so I guess there's sort of two ways that we show it. One is a screening to the general public. We invite people, we know some of them, we don't know. So we're trying to pick things that are broad and easy to understand. So I think when you saw it in San Francisco 2 months ago, we were experimenting with known characters, which is why,
Yeah.
which which is dangerous when you're using sort of IP of other people, right? But I guess we were so when it so when it's crazy ideas guy hustler from San Francisco goes on a date with a lonely venture capitalist, right? Like people get it. The other sort of way we screen it is online, and it's usually small groups of friends, and they all know they all have characters, whether it's one of their friends or some weird thing that they all enjoy. So, and that's where obscure characters that I've never heard of get lots of laughs and lots of traction, because it's important to them, but may not be important if it was to like a broad audience.
So there's so many topics I want to go in on this, but this is starting already into one of them, which is, what's your thought on that personalization? Right? We have a conversation, even with streaming as it comes in, of the fact that people could binge everything, the Netflix model versus the one actual programmed, timed linear model where it's an event and it's okay. Last of Us is on Sunday night. We're all going to talk about it and talk about it the next week. We know when the spoilers are going to hit because it's a shared experience, right? And already streaming, sometimes binging can isolate that because it's, well, I saw it last week, you see it 2 months from now. But then we have these even more personalized experiences that you can create where, like, if Ramon and I go to a screening, we may have roughly similar experiences, but also extremely different experiences. Is that the strength? Is that the weakness? What do you think? Is there a sweet spot you're trying to hit here?
Yeah. So I remember when Batman came out when I was a kid, right? And all the commercials were Batman commercials, and we all, and the Happy Meals were Batman themed Happy Meals, and we all saw the movie, and we all got the action figures, and we all got the trading cards, and it was nice to have that collective experience. But I think those days are gone, sadly. And then so if you can bring that down to the most, an audience of one, right?
Right.
I think that's kind of takes something away from it. I don't imagine I have a personalized movie, TV show, and it resonates with me. I don't know if I really want that. I want some happy medium of a community where I can share these things, but it doesn't have to be broad. There's only one movie this summer, right? You know what I'm saying?
So something like a group chat movie, a movie for your group chat.
Yeah, like a small group of people. So we try to make this thing where there's never a single player mode. We don't actually. I sometimes borrow terms from gaming, but I'm not really super deep in the gaming space. But there are obviously parallels, right?
Right.
But this is always intended to be the multiplayer, multi-viewer. But I don't think we get large audiences seeing the same thing at the same time. The way everyone saw blockbusters. No more Batman.
So
I think
this is one of the reasons why, going to your earlier point about maybe, well, I might be putting words in your mouth, but almost like a new medium or that we have, and that it doesn't necessarily completely replace. Just film comes out. So the example, I think I've given you this example before, and I want maybe if not, I'd love your take on it. I've pointed this out. Okay, film comes as a technology, and we had theater, right? Film comes, and suddenly we can scale to the demand that's actually there, right? There was a supply problem. There's only so many good actors. There's only so many places to go to see the theater. One of the things that film did is it helped solve that supply problem. But in the process, you do get something new. Theater doesn't go away. It's still something, but film, to your point, is different. And I wonder if what we're doing is taking a similar type of entertainment, whether it's improvisation, you mentioned live music, these kind of Dungeons and Dragons, or these improvisational experiences tend to be more participatory. It becomes all the humans need to be involved at this. There's a supply problem, right? There's only so many immersive theater, great immersive theater things. It's really hard to get a great dungeon master kind of thing, right? It's a supply problem. And this technology can help us scale to meet the demand. And we kind of create almost a new medium. Doesn't necessarily mean that, there'll never be D&D again or there'll never be improv again. But we kind of create this new medium as we blend these things. So that's the way I've tended to think about it, that it's not that one, there's an economic issue here, right? We're actually scaling something that does that. My argument being that there is more demand than there is supply for this type of entertainment, but also that it creates something slightly different that sits beside. There probably will, I would argue, there will still be a summer blockbuster. This doesn't necessarily replace it, but it's different. It sits in beside it in the way that Broadway sits beside what we have in Hollywood.
Yeah. Yes. I think it's very interesting how you categorize it as. I don't know if I ever thought of it as a supply problem, right? Because, but there is. Again, I don't.
You can steal it if you want.
Yeah,
I don't know if it'll work.
Definitely gonna steal it. Definitely, 100%. Vaguely know about Dungeons and Dragons, right? And I've played a few times, and I know it's all about having a great dungeon master, right? And that is a rare skill, right? And even that maybe having just creative, interesting people in your group on your campaign or whatever. I also think the mass market, one of the sacrifices of TV and film, right? Whatever that is, is that it's obviously passive, right? It's obviously, but in weird ways, they try to simulate the interaction. So if you think of what's a laugh track, right? A laugh track. Yeah, a laugh track is like corny, but the laughter of the live studio audience gives something to the performers of the live studio audience, and hearing it at home makes you sort of feel that you're inside and watching it live, but you're not.
I don't have to laugh because they're doing it for me.
Right.
I can sit there in silence.
I also think, even if it's just an energy transfer from in like theater, right? In theater, pre-film, right? Last century or this 2 centuries ago, whatever, the century before last, the energy of the crowd, the way the crowd laughs, does inform the performance. And if you think of a storyteller, bard in front of a fire, in front of going from town to town, they're gonna riff off the crowd, right? And that can't happen in traditional passive film and television. So I think, that in a way it's new, but in a way it's also returning to maybe something ancient, if that doesn't sound too pretentious.
No, I agree. I think if anything, we haven't had the technology to be able to bring that into this other digital form yet, right? And now the way we've tended to look at it, and we've talked about this before, there are definitely times where I feel we're GM&T, what we're doing on the game side and what you're doing on the film side is kind of coming at this problem from two different angles. And one thing I think we also look at is, one, multiplayer is important for us, partly because that interaction and because to your point on riffing, these machine learning models, if we're getting kind of technical, they tend to do best when, again, when the human's giving material for them to go with, right? So it's this participatory process, not that there's a AI bard and it can perfectly tell the right story. The point is that there's some collaboration and it's picking up on the storytelling that is already there, that's happening between what was pre-existing, the initial scenario that you guys brought to the table, and then what the viewers are bringing to the table. And it's kind of this magic of the technology to mix it and make it still somewhat coherent so that you can keep experiencing it together.
Funny enough, it's not that you get an AI bard, but rather that you make the audience closer to a bard, because they are injecting the plots and the storylines and really somehow steering and co-inventing actually with the AI, versus being more of an audience that the bard can actually riff off of. It's a weird shared responsibility, at least from what I saw in the screening. It's a weird shared responsibility between the audience and the AI.
Yeah, and there's also like a different distribution of creativity in an audience. There's always one super creative person who has all the good ideas. And then I don't know, 60% of the crowd is putting their toes in, participating, seeing. And then there's a bunch of people who just want to watch, who want to watch other people participate, right?
Right.
So it's not exactly passive, but it's sort of passive-ish.
Oh,
Yep.
if I go to improv and where they're going to do audience participation, I so love seeing others participate.
You
tend
think
not
into
to
your
want.
seat,
I don't know.
Karen?
Yeah, I'm not sitting in the front seat hoping they pick on me. And it's just because that's not what I'm going for generally. Like, it's like all these other people, they worked really hard at being good at this skill. I'm not going to ruin it for them. But yeah, it's an interesting point of like that creativity in the room. The design principle that we've used at Jam and Tea is what I call narrative control.
Mhm.
And I'm curious if you guys have explored this. Like, I think of it as a triangle between, in the course of the story, who has narrative control at any one time?
Mm.
Is it the original author, the designer, right? Before any of this got started, they put some outline, they have that original script, they have the skeleton of the story. Is it the player or the participant, right? The person who's entering in their ideas, right? Or in the game, like suggesting, or is it the AI that acts as kind of this middle where the AI gets to decide as the arbiter what's actually going to, it's taking these 5-6 things coming in, the AI is deciding. And one way we've looked at it from just a systems design or, kind of like a product or game, in our case, particularly game design, is carefully deciding or thinking about who gets control when and why, and ensuring that the system can kind of maintain that a little bit. And I'm wondering, have you guys explored a similar thing of like, when does the original script win? When does the AI win? When does the audience win? Have you figured out the right match? Is that a thing you struggle with?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. It's an excellent question. I'm going to steal it. I'm going to steal your triangle. So to 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 make these experiences, I mean, up until now, we've made these experiences. So the Christmas dinner thing and the first date thing, they have we've made them. And at least with the Christmas dinner thing, we actually worked hard to build up surprisingly rich backstories for each character, even though they're like tropes and like kind of cartoonish. I mean, they look cartoonish, but like their characters are kind of cartoonish. But they have like 7-page deep backstories, and we were actually worked with a bunch of screenwriters to get it right. And then there are sort of plot points that we want to hit, and those plot points are written by the original author. And I would like there to be, I would like what the audience does and what the AI decides. Like, if the AI is the arbiter of whose voice gets heard, I would like all of that to exist in a world created and in parameters and constraints created by the original author. Because I still think that's important, right? And I think we have, maybe not explicitly, but we built in a bunch of controls so that always happens, more or less, or at least hopefully it happens. So we try to make, you can get it to do a bunch of things, but it sort of has to veer to a certain amount of plot points. Otherwise, doesn't make any sense, and you can't really get characters to do things out of character as defined by their sort of backstory. Because without those controls, it's just chaos, bad chaos. There's a good level of chaos where usually when people try it out first, they make the character say bad words or just do zany stuff, which is fine. But without the constraints, it's not really a story, and it doesn't make any sense. It's just Yeah.
It's so funny because we say that for games, right? We also say
Yeah.
without constraints, it's not really a game.
Yeah.
Right.
It resonates
Right.
once.
Yeah, we talk about sometimes this comes up regularly with the challenge of folks who are using this medium to create experiences, using generative AI, is that, when unleashed, yeah, it can create almost anything. And so on the game side, you end up with a toy or a sandbox, which is like, hey, here's a sandbox. You can literally create anything with this sand. And it's like, that's awesome. What's the game? Right? If at any moment I can just kind of Calvin ball just declare I win, that is a very fun creative exercise. Like, it's not to say that there isn't something that's a great human experience there, but that's also not necessarily a game, and particularly doesn't allow for the kind of experiences that we in the game industry have learned that this is what brings people back. This is why people invest in it. There's a sense of mastery over time, and you get better at a thing, and you understand the rules, right? And there's a bunch of things that make a game that give it that kind of experience that we're looking for. Whereas if it's just fan fiction, and I can just at any time, to your point, be like, and then the T-Rex comes into and eats the person at the dining room table, and you're kind of like, okay, like that's amazing, but like, well, what's going on here, right? To your, like, there's good and bad chaos. Is this a limitation of the technology right now too? Like, is it struggle? Like, where are the limits right now that you guys bump up against?
There's so many limits. There's more. There's more. The magical machine where you type in a prompt and get a 2-hour blockbuster doesn't exist. Not even close, right? We render everything in 3D, and the characters have to be pre-baked. So, and we can sort of change how they look, sort of like in a Mr. Potato Head style. And then they can only do a bunch of pre-baked animations, right? So they can't do everything, and only exist on a bunch of pre-baked sets. There are relatively short, like, it looks like we're doing everything in real time, but there's a bunch of smoke and mirrors where we're generating a chunk and then getting a bunch of feedback and generating a chunk. So it's not true real time, right? It's just, it appears that way because we're using some Hollywood magic.
There's
What
always
else?
a little Hollywood magic.
I mean, one thing, everyone wants the characters to sing, okay? And they break into song, and we can't do that. I mean, I would love to do that.
You can't turn it into a musical suddenly, and there's
that'd be awesome.
a dance number. And...
That'd be awesome. That's on the road.
Have you tried? I mean, there are models that do music. Have you tried and see how it feels? Obviously, there are challenges with keeping the same voice, but
it doesn't really. Yeah, we experimented. It doesn't really work.
It's not there yet.
Yeah. So
try.
I have a question for you guys. You guys make you make video games. I gave this presentation about, and it had some quotes from George Lucas and Steven Spielberg about how, rather maybe disparaging quotes about how video games can never tell a story, and it's something about holding a controller. I have a feeling they were from the 80s. The quotes, they were rather stale, but there's definitely a view that there's something called film and television, right? And that's morphed, but it's still the same thing, right? Whatever's on Netflix is still kind of the same flavor as what I saw as a kid sitting in front of a television, and what my parents saw sitting in front of maybe a black and white television with 3 channels or whatever. And then there's this thing called video games, and we think of them as different. So my question is, I don't know, are they different? And is whatever a video game is it impossible to tell beautiful story?
I don't think, I mean, almost by just examples that exist out there, I don't think that's the case, right? You have so many excellent stories told via video game. There is a little bit of this challenge on how much do you want the story to be told by the actions of the player versus how much do you want the authors to tell the story they wanted to tell. With, for example, I don't know, if you take something like Final Fantasy VII or the Final Fantasy series tend to be very much like there's a story that happens and then you play through the motions, but the story is there. when you have things like Baldur's Gate, where there's a lot more variability of what actually happens in the story that gets to tell. And there's the extra extreme, where there's no real story being told by the author, but the games themselves work as story engines. This is the Simon Sylvester view of games. And this is where I like most of the games that I play end up, right? When I play Civilization, I 50% play a game of pretending to be an empire, but 50% of the time I'm imagining what the hell is going on. And I tell myself stories of what's happening because it's like a tool for me to generate stories for myself and that I tell myself all the time. And to your point of a story for one, they end up being a story for one, right? There are stories for just me. And yes, I'm missing the sharing and whatnot. They also tend to be perfectly geared towards me. And I'm telling myself those stories. I understand that everybody has to be this type of player, but you can see how storytelling in games has this huge spectrum.
Yeah. When we think about video games and the various ways they are defined, almost inevitably part of that definition includes interactive. And it's the interactive part that distinguishes it as a medium from these others. And that interactive does mean that there is agency and choice, narrative control, that says that the type of story that we tell will be different. And video games is a huge genre, right? So what story does Tetris tell or does, right? I mean, Pac-Man or Super Mario Brothers tell versus Last of Us, right? And we have this range. And so I think there's an argument that says, yeah, the narrative depth of wow, I could throw a few. I'm deciding how spicy I want to get. A little bit. All right, so we just had the Minecraft movie, right? We just had the Super Mario Brothers movies. These made a ton of money as movies, right? Are they great storytelling? Were they great storytelling in the video game form? We tell these stories across. So I think it is a bit of a spectrum, but it is different, right? If I write a choose your own adventure, it comes in the form of a book, right? That looks like a story that's being told. Is that a story? Does that count? Because early video games sometimes had not that much more complexity in their storytelling capabilities than a choose your own adventure. Today, we can do dynamic storytelling in ways, even before generative AI, that was well beyond what we could do in a choose your own adventure. In fact, arguably now, like we finally can do true dynamic narrative. It's the one part of procedural generation in games that we couldn't easily do before. We could procedurally generate worlds and gameplay and a bunch of things, but procedurally generating story was always not quite the same. And I think that's actually one of the things this tool comes into play is that generative AI comes as a tool into play is that we can do procedural generation of narrative in ways we could not before. That's what's really new. So yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say that every video game, or even in a great video game like The Last of Us, is it the same ability of a storyteller to tell a crafted story the way a great author or director does in other mediums. It is a little different, but that doesn't mean it isn't a medium that it can't tell those kind of same stories, right? I mean, I think Last of Us is a good example. Arguably, there are some video games that go so far on that side, and you look at even maybe some of the Telltale games, where there's a question of I'm almost on rails. I am experiencing this story as it was designed by the authors, and I'm just kind of navigating within a fairly defined space, right? And it's very similar to some immersive theater experiences or other ones, right? Where there's this net, space in which we can tell the story. It's not going to go too far off because there's a physical set and there's a physical location, and right. So yeah, I think it. I think I will defend that games tell stories and that they are a form, but are they the exact same? No. And I don't think they should necessarily try to. They should lean into their strengths. Just like theater and film, when you started off talking about it, there's things about theater and there's things about film that are just different and the types of stories we can tell in them.
I mean, Stephen, you're telling stories and it's, there's a video going on, at least. It's interactive. Is it a game?
We use Unity. We use a bunch of tools. We use a bunch of technology, game developer tools and technology. So, and then there's never an explicit goal, but if you're on a date, and the crowd naturally is like, I'm going to break these people up. or
Right.
I'm gonna make them go on a second date, like that. There's some kind of goal. I have been reluctant to use the word game because, well, I don't. It's a little foreign, and I don't feel like I know it well. The gaming world, and there's no score and no power ups or anything. Oh, we also we did our first sort of online screenings on Twitch. We did it on Twitch before we did it in person. So it's very gamey, despite me saying it's not a game at all. Yeah, I don't know if it's a game. People have fun. That's gamey, right? That's the goal. They have more fun than they have more fun. They have fun. They're not necessarily moved emotionally like you might be in a film. As much as I want people to be moved emotionally eventually.
I think I like this emotional part. We talked earlier about improv and how this improv immersive theater. Do you think, is there, and here's an actual question, is there immersive theater or improv theater that tells emotionally moving stories? Or is the form very geared towards comedy? And is this the same for the type of games or experiences that Geminty and Pickford are doing?
We're working on something now with an outside creator, with this guy named Bernie Sue, who's won 3 Emmys, and it's a murder mystery. So I don't know how funny it's. We're just starting it off, so I don't know how funny it will be, and I hope we sort of explore something that's maybe not funny. Maybe it's suspenseful and thrilling rather than funny. And I should say, in the beginning, I wasn't sure it could be funny because the out of the box Chat GPT jokes, maybe this time last year, were kind of lame, right?
Well, I would add, so for those that are not familiar, there is a whole genre is not the right word, but immersive theater is a thing, right? These immersive experiences. New York has a thriving scene on it. Sleep No More is an example of it. If
Yeah.
and if you don't know what that is, for people that don't know, I'd recommend you can get a whole list of these kind of experiences that are out there. And so I'd argue some of those experiences can be pretty intense and emotional, and there's a whole range of things that artists are exploring in this form. And again, I don't want to replace this, right? I think actually having the physical human connection of this form of entertainment is amazing, but it's also really difficult for people to always get to New York and go to these experiences and do these type of things. And I think this earlier to that kind of supply demand problem, I think we can take some of these experiences and do something. Again, it's just like theater to film. It's not exactly the same. We'll find some new ways of how we tell stories, what's the right way to tell story in this genre, but we're going to be able to bring experiences like that to more people. And I do think I mean, comedy's a great one. I think comedy's an awesome way to connect with folks, but I don't think it'll just be that. I think there will be real resonance and experiences that people will have.
Part of why I ask is because I think emotional or moving stories require a lot more like adherence to the storyline and require a little bit more craft. Not to say that comedy doesn't, but we were talking about improv or LMs coming up with hallucinations. The errors are almost like a feature because it can be silly, it can like take in weird directions that the audience may celebrate. But if we're talking about something very serious,
I don't
yeah.
I don't know. And again, sorry, Steven, I'm not sure what your take on this is, but I think the participatory part is a bit of a unique angle because where a lot of the emotional resonance happens is when you connect, right? When you see something on a film, and one of the reasons that you feel emotional about something like is because there's a resonance. You see some of yourself, you've gone through something, you've lost a loved one, you've had this kind of a loss, or you empathize, right? So when you bring more of yourself and more of yourself is in that story, there's a real opportunity for some real deep emotional experience that I agree with you, Ramon, that like it requires capabilities in the system. Comedy is sometimes a little easier because slapstick and a lot of other, it can be a little easier to kind of inject humor. But I don't think that we are incapable of creating these deeper experiences. And if anything, as when someone feels vulnerable enough to participate in these experiences, when it is kind of the right room of folks, and you're like, oh, I'm bringing part of myself and I'm telling my story, and it's like, oh, I had this deep experience in a date scenario or at a family dinner and something, and you see that start to happen out there. There's forms of that kind of role play that I think is very powerful that people can be connected to.
There have been isolated moments in like the date or in the family thing that, like, amongst the silliness, there have been moments of like someone gets really angry, like a character gets really angry, and you kind of feel it, see, like a tinge of emotionality. There's a few other things that I think there are technical constraints. So our characters look like goofy cartoons. So it's easy to laugh at them, right? And it's hard to like maybe feel like that's me, right? That's like a cartoon humanoid thing. And then music. And I actually think this is possible, but we haven't. AI generated mood music, I think, would help. It's sort of, they do it in film and TV, right? Like there's like a somber piano music. I think that's entirely possible now. We're just not really doing it. That's apart from the breaking into song and starting music.
I actually had a question on those goofy characters. I wrote up for earlier. Does the audience see? I can speak for myself, but I'm curious in general. Do you think they are able to see beyond the pre-baked characters, or how much of a spell break is it? And I'm saying this from my own screening. It was sort of stock characters that were representing Voldemort and Palpatine. And for me, it was fine. But I wonder how often do you see? Oh, it's hard for them to relate that this guy is Voldemort.
You can do a bunch of customizations now if you want something to kind of look like a character. I think there's still a suspension of disbelief type thing that has to work. But these are solvable problems, right? I mean, there's super cool, text to 3D stuff and instant rigging, and it's not quite there yet, but it's super cool research.
I'm just always curious about, there's this idea of on purpose making the graphical representation of a character simpler so that the audience can imagine it. So if you're playing RimWorld, the characters are on purpose very simple, so you can think, oh, this is how this character looks like in your own mind. It's a little bit of more a book, right? Like you're essentially filling in a lot of the gaps. And then there's you actually fully portray it. And I'm always curious on where the sweet spot lies, especially when we have such degrees of freedom on the narrative, but the degrees of freedom on what can be represented graphically are not yet there yet.
So I don't have an answer. That's a great question. That's a great question. I mean, the characters that you saw are like limitations of the technology and the amount of resources we can devote to them. So they're not some clever. We're not trying to be clever. They're the best we can do with the time and resources we have, and the technical constraints of having them move in real time. So
I think back to early Pixar films with Toy Story and the creative choice to do toys, which they could. If you look at the early Toy Stories, there were very few times that we saw like actual human faces because we recognized the limitation of the technology at the time. And I think we're going to have to do similar Hollywood magic and smoke and mirrors as we build up. This is not a holodeck right now where everything is in perfect photorealism and in VR or something. We have other ways that we're exploring the medium right now, but I don't think that's a limit. Again, just because Toy Story, you can tell a story in that. I mean, it's like the graphics of South Park are not necessarily, cutting edge, but there still can be a lot of told in that.
Yeah, certainly.
Can I ask another?
Yeah.
So there's been a sort of change in the perception of AI in traditional Hollywood. So there was a strike summer before last, and this is a dirty word. It was definitely a dirty word, and no one wanted to touch it. And I think things have not fully come around, but there's a lot more. There's a lot more acceptance and a lot more sort of looking at it, looking at the opportunities. So my question is, I imagine similar things have happened in the gaming world. Yeah,
We're probably some months some months behind this story
Really?
you're telling.
Okay.
It depends. It depends, right? Like these industries are huge. There are regional differences. The way that you get like what's happening in China versus Europe versus North America and other areas have very different attitudes. Um, there are some areas. So last week here in Los Angeles with GamesBeat, which is a game industry conference, and there were a lot of conversations around the role of AI, and there were some people who were very bullish and some people who were very not, or very careful what they said. And I've seen the same thing. I mean, Stephen, we were again in LA this week. There's another event. It's called AI in the Lot. AI on the Lot. That's by the AI in LA group. It's kind of really sponsoring it. Todd and a bunch of those folks. These tend to be AI forward folks, though, that tend to show up at this event. I was able to attend a little bit last year. I am curious what you're expecting, since we're on this topic. Like, you're going to be there this week. By the time this podcast comes out, it'll all be over. But I'm like, what are you expecting here in the same, like, again, this is the AI forward segment of Los Angeles, of the Hollywood at this sort of event. What do you feel like we're going to see more people, to your point, like more people coming forward and addressing it? Do you still think there'll be a lot of pushback?
Yeah. So there, the conversations that I've had are like, one's feeling towards AI is really a function of sort of where they are in their careers, to be honest. So I've had a few conversations with like super like people at the top of like the Hollywood hierarchy pyramid, and they are so excited about the possibilities. Both of, I mean, there's a little bit of like compressing costs and making what is frankly a super inefficient industry more efficient. But then, how do we do new things, right? And like embracing that. And then sort of maybe young people who are like at the start of their career, they're looking like, hey, I don't have to wait. I don't have to eat shit for 10 years, and I can make something, and not ask permission, right? And do it with
Right.
$200 of Anthropic credits or whatever. And then there's the soft, middle area of folks that have paid their dues and maybe are a little bit not so receptive to this. But I do think that things are changing. You can definitely talk about it now. It's not like a dirty word. I think the one area, well, at least the main area that's fair, is the idea of rights and people stealing rights. I think that's a very fair concern, and the one that should be addressed. And it's kind of hard to, I don't know what the answer to that is, but it's wrong to steal people's intellectual property, So that's definitely a fair concern that the industry has and should figure out what to do with.
When people ask you about that, like, what do you say? Like, how do you guide their thinking, or what thoughts are you able to share?
We pay screenwriters. All the voices are like actual voice actors, and we pay them the SAG-AFTRA rates there's like a voice recommendation, and we pay them those rates. We also use off-the-shelf models, so it's impossible. I don't know how to tease out if Anthropic or OpenAI have taken someone's intellectual property. I don't know how to tease that out. So I guess we're complicit in there in using like everyone else on planet Earth, right? So, but there's got to be a way to figure it out. There's got to be a way to compensate people fairly.
This somehow rhymes a little bit with the taxi story when Uber and Lyft came out. As in, when Uber and Lyft came out, they basically were sidestepping the rules at the time, which were, you need a license plate, taxi license plate to be able to operate. And what ended up happening was just everybody took Uber and Lyft, and nobody ever came to like compensate the taxi medallions, or the people who had invested in the taxi medallions. And what you were talking about, the people who had paid their dues in the industry, sort of, not to say that it's exactly the same, but there's some rhymes in that.
Yeah, I tend to think of it as I know I'm dating myself, but the reference I tend to use is Napster. It's similar. I mean, massive copyright infringement by everyone who is using, Napster and LimeWire and Kazaa and all of those kind of things. And yet, there's a couple things I think are interesting. One is there was so much. Essentially, I'm going to dress this up in a little economics, but so much consumer demand. This is what people wanted. They wanted access to this music. The music industry was not getting it, and we eventually, over many years, we went through iTunes and a bunch of other models till largely Spotify and music streaming is very popular now, right? I think one of the challenges for us then is to think about as an industry, whether it's film industry or game industry, is what type of future do we want to live in? A Spotify future? Is that the kind of thing that we're moving for? Is that the way is that the contract compromise that we create between the producer and consumer, between how artists are compensated and how people consume it? Because things are going to happen in this regard, right? I do get sometimes, I think sometimes my startups have not always worked as well because I'm not so willing to break all the laws like Uber, right? But I do think we need to push the boundary to find where are we that we can create things that really do make hopefully the world a little better place, or we create new kind of experiences and we flourish in all great way, but we find a new way that again people are compensated, that we live the future we want to live in some way. And by fighting it, sometimes I think an industry can end up in a worse situation than trying to figure out like, okay, how do we walk forward here?
I like this Spotify analogy because now it makes me think, it makes clear the distribution problem, right? Like Spotify can clearly say, oh, you clicked on this track, you're playing it for 10 minutes, whatever. When it's here is a black box with very hard to attribute connections. It's like, okay, how do you even say how much time did I refer to Stephen's work versus Aaron's?
Oh, yeah, they're hard problems.
Yeah.
There's another consumer model. And actually, Stephen, another point for you is like, how does this change consumption as well too? Because there's there's one, cheap content being fundamentally cheaper, in theory. Again, we're not at the point prompt. Now I get like a 2-hour film, but a lot of folks are looking at generative AI because they believe it's going to bring down content generation costs. But also, if we can if you build what you're building, I'm going to guess, I'm making shit up here, but I'll go to your channel and I'll be, because my friends are over and we're just all going to watch and it'll be on demand. And someone had mentioned how we're moving to a point where is entertainment becoming a utility? Like water, like I just turn it on. Like the music was limited resource, right? Like you had your records, you had your CDs, and now it's just like, yeah, I tell my smart speaker turn music on, and it's like I turn the water on or the air conditioning. Like, are we gonna get? Is there something there also? It almost has this more utility, like turn on the entertainment. Is that different from what we've had? Is it? I don't know. There's something came up last week at GamesBeat I thought had me thinking quite a bit.
I think we already have the infinite entertainment. You can look at, there's endless. There's more YouTube. There's more stuff on YouTube that I would find vaguely interesting than there are hours in my life to consume it. Right. So I don't know. Maybe good content is still a scarce resource, and maybe shared experiences with your friend group where you're co-creating stuff is a scarce resource. And maybe I don't know. I hope that if there's content that a small group of people create, they are sort of more emotionally invested in it, and then that is more valuable IP, at least to them. And
To them.
Yeah, to them. And maybe sort of cynically, that's a targeted advertising our audience, because those people and they're loyal to that certain thing, and then kind of what they like and what they might be interested in, sort of their eyeballs would be interested in buying or whatever advertising is. I don't know what advertising is.
I think we're getting close to, as always, these conversations could go on way longer. Was there anything, Stephen, that we didn't cover that you want to, either stuff you guys are doing or topics you want to hit as we kind of wrap up?
No.
All right. We did it. We did it. Mission accomplished.
Maybe, I don't know. We had, when we spoke before, we talked about sort of the ancient, the rules of storytelling, archetypes, and I don't know if that's interesting. There's this DeepMind paper about how, was it Dramatron or whatever, where they took, it feels you have these ideas about, oh, there are the ancient laws of narrative, and if you could just get the LLM to do that, then you might make something good. And then some academics from Stanford and DeepMind say the same thing in really clever language, and then people are like, oh, it's a real thing now. You ever had that?
A grammar of stories sort of thing.
Well,
there's a few.
No, go ahead, please. No, I like.
Yeah, there's a few models in this space. There's a few models in this space that people are exploring. One I bring up that's very, very niche in the tabletop gaming space is Hamlet's hit points. That I'm not sure is the ideal model, but even so, you've got everything from the hero's journey kind of, and all the TV tropes and all these kind of things that do show these patterns, and definitely stories. A lot of even existing training model, we get some of this out of a story already, out of a model. There's a number of folks doing interesting stuff in the industry, particularly on the game side, for example, of looking at how do they better train this, how do they better train narrative models or train those beats or identify what the right beat is. The Dramaton paper and a few others explore this in more detail. I haven't seen anything that I think, at least publicly, that's like, well, hey, go do this model, it's got it, or like we've got it cracked. But there's a lot of interesting work in this space. And an analogy that is probably a little too cute, right? Because it's more complex than this. But if we look at, we mentioned a couple times already that we've got models that surprisingly tell pretty good music, but can make pretty good music. Digressing. The book Gödel Escher Bach that looked at early kind of artificial intelligence strange loops, in the back of it, one of the questions was, could it ever make music? And it was like, no, never. This is never going to work. There's too much human emotion in this. And then we do it, and it's kind of like, whoa, wait a second, how is that possible? So I think we'll get through some of these these things that we conceive as like, that's too human of an experience for us to be able to replicate. But I think music is a good example, right? There are ways where there are things that we can say about why a piece of music resonates, why it's good. We could argue that there's a lot of pop music that follows the exact same chords and the exact same things because it resonates in certain ways. And we can find, I suspect, some of the research is looking at similar patterns to say, well, okay, it's not the exact same models, the exact same way we analyze music, but there are ways we can analyze stories that tell us some other things about, hey, right now, how do we want the tempo to go up or down? Where are we in the assembling a piece of music, assembling a piece of story? What are the missing pieces that we need to get to that act 3 or wherever we're trying to get to?
That was good. I like that.
Yeah. We just need to finish figuring it out, right? I mean, there's a lot of interesting work being done in this space. There are a couple papers out. I'm, really excited to see what you guys figure out too, because I know you guys are working on the problem. So, yeah.
I actually think it would be interesting to incorporate. We don't do this yet, but we've talked about it. But you got this real-time signal from the audience.
Yeah.
Some rough measure of goodness as the thing is playing along, as a feedback loop, which we don't do. But I think at scale, it could be super, super interesting. People are laughing at this point, and or something happens, and then there's a bunch of crowd prompts, crowd suggestions, and that's a real-time signal. And I think that could be very powerful if it's built in.
You mean on top of the prompts that the audience is putting into the system?
Yeah. So like next time you run it, you have an idea.
Well, going to like the Bard example, what you're looking for is taking that temperature of the room. Like you're
Yeah.
like the DJ who's, we need to, it's, the party's dying here. We need to kind of like help it up, or it's like, it can have that feel of it, which is both amazing and also terrifying to me, because if it's like, if we need anything else, like being able to better, Skinner box humans to kind of like stick around for the next, just more and more, we're going to attention grab you. But it's inevitable to some degree. The full expression of this technology will definitely have ways that it's looking for audience feedback to be like, are they still engaged? Are they ready to flip the channel? It's like about to flip the channel. Yeah. You can just imagine some telenovela soap opera thing where it's like they're all getting bored and suddenly the long lost twin crashes through the window and you're like, oh, I'm in now, right? You can totally see that this is where we could get to that point, right?
Now I'm imagining that's exactly when the ad comes in. So the tween comes in and everybody's paying attention.
Right. Well, I'm excited to navigate this space with you, with folks like you. I'm excited to see what you guys have at AI on the lot this week. And yeah, it's always a great conversation. I love what you guys are doing. I can't wait to see more.
Thank you.
Stephen, where can people find you? Where can people check out what we talked about?
Pickford.ai. There's like a wait list. That's it. There's
Any places you're doing screenings other than San Francisco?
Other than AI on the lot? Yeah, we're going to do something in London in July at BFI, and then maybe in Korea at the Busan International Film Festival, which I think is in October. That's what we got planned. But semi-regularly in San Francisco.
Awesome.
Yeah. Strongly recommended. Stephen,
thank you.
Thank you so much for coming. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening to the full episode. We really hope you enjoyed the discussion. It would help us out a ton if you subscribed to the show on your platform of choice, as well as shared it with folks you think would find it useful. You can always check out playingwithinference.com to get in contact with us, join our Discord, or just find the links to the episodes. See you next week.